Hello, and welcome to a student's guide to Vital Endgame. And in keeping with the theme of this being a study group, oh, we have Ping with us. Just going to get right to the position that I have here. In making these, there's a lot of things that one could share in a study group that it's difficult to do when you're deconstructing a go position, a situation from a go game. So I've taken a concept from the end game and I've kind of reconstructed it into a hypothetical game to show you how it works in terms of playing an actual end game when you're looking at specific local positions and how to play them. So these are 4 different in-game situations that you would might encounter that all require a different thing to consider. So the first thing is that these big points are going to be, and I'm going to call them big, but that's probably confusing right off the bat, because if we're looking at the size of things, then we're not considering the order of play or the actual stuff of the end game, which is all about the order. There are many people who play Go positionally, and studying local positions and saying what is the best move in them will completely miss that aspect of putting it into context. So this is the context of an actual game, hypothetical one, where you see that there are a lot of moves in the center, but in terms of points, whoever plays there first is not going to it's not going to make a difference in the point calculation. So a lot of time might be spent looking at the various connections and seeing if any of them can be severed or what might be done, or thinking of this as a kind of life and death position. But looking at it strictly as endgame, say this is currently White's turn to play, and we have primarily 4 places on the edge that are important to play. That's going to mirror the opening, where there are 4 corners that are urgent to play, but there's no rush to play them, in the sense that regardless of who has Sente, 2 of them are going to go to one side and 2 of them are going to go to the other, regardless of whether Black or White plays first. They are the most urgent places to play because they are the largest. They are the largest in the opening because they are prerequisites to making territory. So they themselves don't have any point value that one can count, but in conjunction with following moves, they will make points. So the endgame would be the stage where these aren't prerequisites to making the territory. The territory will be already made, even if they are not finished. And this would be a prerequisite to scoring it. So the primary edge places to play are here, 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 and here. And it would be possible, but only, it wouldn't necessarily, you wouldn't necessarily know the best order of play just by counting the size of each move and playing the biggest ones in order, because there's this mysterious order of play that we're trying to actually figure out. That it's not something that is positionally going to be readily apparent by looking at the size of local moves. it might seem like a wasted exercise because after all, we don't control what our opponents do. But if one's opponent is playing, best practices or what's likely that one can expect, we can start to see something. So first off, I'm going to start this by saying it does matter what you play in the middle. And one wants to either play something in the middle that is helpful, but not necessarily a move that would be ignored, right? And one would want to also consider whether it needs to be responded to. So these simple sente moves that might largely be in the center of are, they go against the concept of minimalism. Minimalism is really important. You don't want to play anything unnecessary that might mess up the situation. So what would be an example of that would be if Black played something like this, whether now or if it was played earlier, and White responded. So keeping that in mind, can remember that this exchange was played. And whether in a review, if a professional like ooh, and you might say, well, it's trivial, right? Because whether you play and respond, it doesn't matter. So we have the four edges, which are properly, one could say that they are corners. This case, well, it's probably, this is all going to the order of play. So in any kind of situation where we're looking at the best move locally, trying to figure out which one to play first is a matter of, you want to play the order that gives you the largest number of these in-game positions. So what's the best way to do this? Let's look at this just locally first. For White to play here, well, it's actually Black's turn to play. Okay, that's not going to be helpful. Let me push past. For White to play here, notice this shape is the spoiled tiger mouth, and generally speaking, the best shape to play is this simple. Here it's going to look like a push, but you can see if you rotate it or put it somewhere else, it's the kick and then coming up. So this creates this is an unfavorable shape because it's inefficient. The stone is kind of veering off here. This is the shape that Black wouldn't necessarily want to achieve, and White's best bet from a shape point of view. So this is one of the reasons why I can't handle the kick, and then extend up, even though in this case the order was changed so that it's a push. So if Black responds, then it is sente, meaning sente because if the strict sense of sente meaning playing anywhere first, it was White's sente and White played here, and White retained the move because Black answered it. If Black does not answer it, then it is gote, but it still might be the largest move. So one doesn't necessarily have to count the points here, but one could note one thing about it is that it's going to affect the territory on both sides. So White is gaining and Black is reducing by this move. Some moves are going to be straight reductions where White doesn't gain any points that way, and some are going to be straight gains. So a straight gain move is usually earlier on because it's more efficient. You're not going to be able to play many gote moves in the endgame that make points, because at this stage, territory needs to be surrounded on all four sides, or you can't count it. So if black doesn't respond, this white move becomes gote, and a sente move or a gote move can have a follow-up. A sente move is forcing in the sense that it could be, it could threaten a border breach. And in that case, the threatened border breach should be for the entire territory. In other words, you can't block it in sente. If you block a move that is going to be a border breach, it's either because it's the most urgent place on the board, because that's going to affect the score the most, or you've just taken a loss, because if you were going to block it later, you should have blocked it before, if you had a choice to do that. So anything that's strictly just making territory is, because of order of play considerations, going to be smaller than something where the largest is going to be, the largest will be a territory swing, where what was formerly one side's territory becomes the other side's territory. The next is that when both sides are going to gain territory by it. Then you have straight reduction, and then you have making territory. Okay, so that's the order of the best way of doing it in terms of affecting the score, not necessarily in terms of counting exactly how many points there is. So when you see things like this in books, and it says and when you count all the follow-ups and everything, it looks like enormous, right? It's like, 17 points, 18 points, whatever. But the score didn't change by that much. In fact, sometimes it doesn't change at all. We wonder, like, why is that? So notice that here, if black blocks, it's still white's turn to play. And so if white assumes that black will block, then white is going to get another move. And if black blocks that, white will get another. And then if black blocks that, white will get another, the left. So imagine white's to play, white here, here, then here, here, here. Let's just say this. Let's go all the way, just make it crazy. Here. So white start to play, white got all four moves. Notice that white didn't rush to play this one necessarily. White could, on the off chance that, because it is sente, right? But we're assuming a play, a response. So if this, and then this, and then this, that's going to be the absolute max. But that isn't necessarily correct order of play, but that's what you might see in a book, and black might think, well, I certainly handled that, absolutely correctly. I haven't counted this situation, but I'm assuming a lot. Let's say, just for fun, let's say black played there, and the white says, maybe I should have done that, we're just calling this a hypothetical. Okay, and then black does this. And now we're going to count the score. Do this for fun. We can assume all these moves. You can kind of assume this. So you can start to see where, these one pointy things might make a difference, but there's ping chewing on plastic. It's not good. So one might often see a lot of time spent, time isn't spent like figuring out the order of moves like way back when. It's like, like, because we can start to count like what's 1 point or what's not 1 point. This isn't the kind of detail that I'm saying one should spend a lot of time. So I'm just doing this. And then I'm going to count. Now I count by pairs. So 21 to 32, and then with Comey, so white doesn't slightly have enough. So if I were to modify this for a book for a dramatic effect, I would slightly play with it so that it would be some kind of half point like Marvel. But this isn't enough for white to win, which means that in this case, at the beginning, the very beginning, black could have answered every move and still won the game easily. So what that suggests is that black should, right? There's no reason to play with this order. And if one is able to envision that, and then from here, count how much territory. So this is not some kind of estimate where, you know, we don't really know what to call exactly this. But if you did all this at this point and knew that you could answer everything and win the game, that is exactly what you should do. And white would be desperately trying to gain more, because we said it was right. It's like 3.5 point difference or something. So white is going to be struggling to. One of the things I wanted to show was that how something like this could make a difference. Because if, for example, this isn't there, right? Imagine that black was behind in some way and, you know, black did something else. That's not a good example. Like black could have taken this point instead of this, like, because it's giving white an opportunity to answer. If it is white's turn to play without that exchange, then this becomes, notice that this is that same spoiling the tiger mouth shape. That becomes, this move threatens the border breach rather than just a move that takes points and reduces for black. So if black connected, then this is certainly going to be enough for white to win the game, regardless. So something like that could make the difference between winning and losing the game, although it wouldn't be apparent when one played it. It would come up later. And so one would like to practice minimalism and then just have that as a consideration. And by the way, the reason why I'm doing this is because if you do take these local positions out of context, you could get all of them correct, but you still wouldn't necessarily be able to use it effectively in a game to win the game. So you have to put the things together. Notice that when I'm doing all this counting, I already just know where it's going to be. And part of that is just the order of play based on shape. So it's on a bedrock of positional play, but there are a couple of books. One is called Zone Press Park by Oman, I guess, and then Takemiya also talks about like something he calls the tango, and you can see this in Ishida as well when he's talking about reading 3 moves ahead. So however you're going to phrase it, there, natural flow or whatever, there's this like 1, 2, 3 idea of it, and if one is deconstructing that for a book, it is a nightmare. And one of the stories I was going to tell was that in trying to figure out how to do this, I'm trying to deconstruct what it is about this order of play. And it whenever I'm somewhat of an insomniac, but the thing that will put me instantly to sleep, I think it's because my brain has to be working, is to look at any kind of go position. So I had these like my little index cards and I was trying to write them. And the maximum I've ever been in bed doing go is like 5 minutes before I'm instantly asleep. What dreams will there be? None, it turns out, and then I'll sleep like a rock. So knowing this, how could I possibly either be an insomniac or not the greatest Go player of all time? I don't know. But um, so when I woke up this morning, all I found was just like an explosion of 3x5 index cards everywhere with this. So I'm, regardless of that, that's kind of weird study group thing. And the reason why that move would make a difference is because, well, for one, you could just slice right through that, right? So whether or not you must play or not matters, depending on whether one has been a minimalist or not. So this is, you could look at it as a shape thing, or you could say, what's the biggest border breach? And so if one was trying to come up with a formula, you might say, oh, I could like do a 1-point jump, because that's the move where black is blocking. So I'm decreasing it by more. And then one could read a lot like down one path, but you've already kind of, you're going down the wrong path. So it doesn't matter how far you go. And you might look at it in terms of if it works or not. So one might say black here, white here, and then I'd look at this and say, oh, okay, this is a knight's move, jump cut it. And then if here, 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 you might do all this reading and say, oh, so now it's 2 against 2. So this is fine. And I've breached the border as much as possible. So, right, because before it was here, and now you've got one less point too. So in some weird dimension where the maximum reduction, regardless of whether it was sente or not. So in this case, black didn't need to do anything to have it be now black sente or black's turn to play. And then black could do, if it mattered, black could, play here or play this, or so there's no real guideline. But take a look at this, because you could have done a huge amount of reading on the clock, generally when there's, seconds are ticking at this point, and come up with this. And then, and I've been in this, we're going on 40 plus years of this. So if you get to this stage, then remember you're reading this, right? And so someone's like, oh no, you could just do this, and then white's going to die on a big scale. And then someone else will say, well, that's of course easy for you because you're a professional. And it's like, how did you read that? And nobody reads that, right? So the point being that it's not exactly memorizing that I wouldn't do this in this case. There's a lot of things that would come up that just from the beginning, whether I'm playing here or not, depends on, whether this exchange has been made and whether black's going to respond to that. If black didn't respond, did whatever, this would be the follow-up, right? Once again, you might think, well, this is going to reduce the maximum, right? But that is going to leave gote, even though you have a sente follow-up. So you're going to start to see that, like, if black starts responding to these, like, kind of it's like a reverse sente thing, right? if black is going to convert every gote move into sente for white by responding, and this is the problem with responding in the endgame, sometimes you need a response, like we saw. If black just responded to everything, black was going to win this game because of the structure of it. But if black is starting to respond here to things that it's going to start to get mathematically like just, you know, welcome to combinatorial mathematics. Okay, so black blocking here, and then white does this because, oh, it's bigger, right, than playing here. Right? And then here, but then black converts it. And so by the end of that, it's just so like, you know, I couldn't even begin to tell you like who's going to win this game. And that's why it seems like if someone says, you know, oh, it's over, then you say, no, there's just like a whole, maybe one is hoping like, well, maybe black will convert all whites moves into sente, who knows? But this is supposed to be the order of it, right? And that's going to leave a one-way sente move, that duh, which you can do or not right now because there's no, you know, right? So that would be the order. And so that's how we're counting it at this stage. Right? Going a little bit further, if I did this, which is got to be the number one thing that people will try to do, because if you're looking at it from a local position and you're trying to count the maximum amount of territory you can destroy at that point, that's the one. And there's no, it seems like kind of like, oh, that's an extra consideration. And if we did it in the opening, it would be like, well, I never thought to count the number of stones or moves in a joseki because it's just supposed to be equal, right? So like, that's fine. We took care of it. It didn't matter that, you know, someone spent 4 moves more to make an equal position or something like that. So the reason why I would dismiss this, like, even before I got there, is because this is a throw in at the 2-1 point, and that's going to bring up just like a plethora of other things. If you notice, like there's a concept of miai, which is with sente and gote, it's like one of those really mysterious things that might just have this very simple meaning. If something is miai, you know, could that properly be called sente? Not really, because it, you know, it's its own thing. But if you look at the board, divide it in half, but don't do it like as it's a square, or rotate it and then pretend it's a diamond. You see along the diagonal axis that the moves at the 2-1 point, they are reflected along that axis. And that is incredibly useful in the opening, which you'll see. But the strange things that are going on at the 2-1 point are exactly that everything is reflecting. And so that's just one of the major things of the end game, because corners they have the prerequisites for making territory. So that's primarily what's going to be happening. So this throw in would make that impossible. So if black is going to do this and white's going to respond in some way, then black is going to be hugely ahead, right? So this isn't going to be sente. In other words, black will not retain sente, but black could always retain sente based on a response. Sometimes one should not respond. And the difference there, you know, that would be if black, you know, needed to play one of these, the 4 urgent places to play there, depending on who gets them, if it matters for the outcome of the game, which it usually will, actually, which is why that is going to be the inflection point. But yeah, so remembering from the earlier 4 points, so you could make territory, it has no effect. You could break territory, that is not gaining, or you could do a swing, right? So one could get into a point calculation of which one is bigger, but one could also use that kind of thing. So that's why we're not going for maximum breakage. We could say white's next move is here, and that's based on reading and knowing that throw in and whatever, and then knowing about this. And so you could know all that and play here, or you could just play here because we've assigned it some enormous point value. And then, but it all seems like mysterious and like it was a calculation when it really isn't. It's just the stuff of Go. So in this case, again, maximum breakage. In this case, this might not even be the maximum, but keeping with the idea of white doing this going forward, and then black. So this is necessarily going to be Gote, unless black answers in this weird reverse Sente way, which is never a good idea. So the flow of it is going to be white here, black blocks, and then white away. Da, 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 the tango or the zone press park. Sente response park. Right? Why are they dancing? We don't know. Okay, so here, here. Now white's turn to play. White can make a territory, or white could break, right? So if black were behind, black might not necessarily want to make this Sente. Black might do, and then this is the only place where you would be getting into a kind of mutual destruction, because blocking it would not be good, but there is going to be a difference. And so I did discover later on that the theory of mutual destruction is actually not to attune, because I know him. He didn't do that. Okay, so it's tempting to, because this move is so huge, and we see the same shapes. The same shapes are going to come up over and over. So the correct move is here, not this one. And then if black is going to respond, then black gets everything. So if this, there's no point in maximizing the number of points if you have a clear win. But if white did this, then you can't block directly, right? And so how to handle that in that case, you can pull back, and then continuing with this, if you went the maximum, you would lose Sente. But black shouldn't be responding to this either necessarily. So this has been a little bit complex, but I thought I would take care of four of the problems in the assessment test, and also try to put some context into it, because I am envisioning someone reading Vital Endgame and getting a perfect score, which would be phenomenal to begin with, but still not getting there. And then I would be losing a bet. Okay, so black coming in like this. Now here, this isn't about a tango, right? Because this is just one move, and it's the maximum break, but it's Gote, right? White doesn't necessarily have to respond to that, life and death considerations aside. So you wouldn't do this in this case, and you don't need to pull back here. You can do the 1 point jump. And in terms of minimalism, remember here, we pushed in, and the reason why we pushed in is because we were gonna jump cut, but one might think to push in anyway. That's not going to matter in this scenario because that doesn't it's not going to afford you the move that you really want to play, which is this because of these considerations. So minimalism, again, the same idea, would suggest without pushing in, just doing something like that, right? Because then you haven't done this thing necessarily. And then there is another consideration, and again, it would depend on whether one can do the clamp and whether this is Atari or not might be an issue. Again, you're getting into the issues of before that, was there something so that white got this middle stone in? When white pulls back and plays here, there's a question, not in this case, but in many cases of, you know, is it a rush to play this 1 point? Which one should you do first? Because in some cases, black may need to respond. So that is the stuff of the end game, and that stuff can actually be easily learned in a kind of is that word prescribed way? Like there is a way of doing that in a discrete way that is not the mysteries of Go. But that doesn't make it like less interesting. To me, it makes it just like the most fascinating puzzle. So there's no math that I could think of locally that I did here at all. And if you think about it, there are professional Go players as young as 11. They aren't doing the complicated math either, right? They're thinking about that simple tango, 1, 2, 3, and something that I have utterly failed to write. But I felt like if one saw enough examples of it, I mean, if everyone around you was waltzing, you would waltz as well. And so that's one of the things that, like growing up in an Asian culture, is it is it nature? Is it built into the system? These kinds of things. That's not really what's, yeah, it's, you've seen waltzing your whole life, and that's what it's about. So I'm glad you joined me. Thank you so much. And I'll talk to you soon.